It's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page. And love and tradition of the grand design, some people say, is even harder to find. Well, then there must be some magic clue inside these gentle walls. 'Cause all I see is a tower of dreams, real love bursting out of every scene. Days go by, it's the bigger love of the family.
Hey guys, what's up? Today we will talk about theory of evolution. What exciting subject now! In first part in this video, we will understand why Darwin became a crucial figure for elaboration of this theory. In second part, we will see a mechanism of evolution, with in particular natural selection. And to finish, we will approach a bad interpretation of this theory, a social Darwinism. Are you ready?
Charles Darwin was born in 1809 in England. He is the fifth child of a doctor who has big hopes for his son that he becomes a doctor too. But Charles is more interested in the world around him than school. Later he will describe himself as an innocent folk, but his difficulties at school do not represent his ability. He is just designed for something else. He makes chemistry experiences in a little secret laboratory in the home garden shed. He overlooks classes to harvest sea species. Then he analyzes them with a makeshift microscope. He learns taxidermy with a former slave who tells him tremendous stories about tropical forests. He collects rare beetles and classifies them by species. He goes through the off-road country to discover splendid spots, still wild. The world is too beautiful to spend time in school to read classical Greek. Then he doesn't rush into studies. He knows that his father wants Charles to become a doctor, and he will pay for it if necessary. It leaves plenty of time for Darwin to lead his scientific experiences and discoveries, until his father realizes his scheme and proposes to Darwin to become a pastor. At this key moment of his life, he receives a letter from his professor and mentor, John Stevens Henslow. He proposes to Charles to leave England for 2 years to embark on a trip as a volunteer naturalist and map coasts across the world. Sure, Darwin gets excited, but he quickly bumps into his father's opposition, who is seeing one more excuse to not study. But Charles' uncle takes sides of the young man with a powerful argument. At least Darwin's running costs will be cheaper. In that way, the 27th of December 1831 at 2 p.m, the exploration vessel of the Royal Navy leaves the Plymouth port with Charles Darwin on board. After a long crossing, the crew arrives in view of Brazil. It is the first step of a long journey. Throughout, the young naturalist seizes any opportunity to land and explore the hinterland. Darwin faces the sticky heat of the Brazilian pampa to collect insect specimens. He digs up prehistoric mammal fossils in Uruguay. He endures the coldness of the land of fire and Cap Horn's storms. He is amazed that animals survive in the muddy water of the big salt lakes of Argentina. He suffers the thirst for observing successively ostrich and lizard during multiple hours. Then, the 15th of September 1835, the Beagle arrives in view of Galapagos Island. There are volcanic islands lost in the middle of Pacific Ocean. They are a smashing laboratory for Darwin. Indeed, he can take a close look to unique animals in the world. He realizes that on each island there is different birds populations. However, they belong to the same species, but they develop specific traits, as if in the past they were isolated each other and they became new branches, new animals. This little observation is fundamental. It is the bedrock of Darwin's thinking. The 2nd of October 1836, after a journey of 4 years, 9 months and 5 days, the Beagle finally comes back to England. But Darwin doesn't know that during his absence, his former professor has carefully made known his entire discoveries. So this is with the bold fame that Darwin comes back to United Kingdom, and that will be helpful. He returns from his travel with a lot of simple, precious notes from entire notebooks and an idea, a good intuition. With all his accumulated experience, Darwin takes his time to think, cross-check details and analyze. He wants to be self-confident, and he will do that before publishing anything about this subject. But why all of this burden? Because his theory is revolutionary. It can be summarized this way. The living beings are in constant evolution. From generation to generation, the parents transmit some of their physical traits to their children. For example, a tall man has good chances to have tall children. In the wild, some of these traits can be useful, unneeded, or even disabling. A taller child could pick fruits up on high branches of a tree. Oppositely, he could not hide from predators. Consequently, the environment favors the survival. That means the breeding of individuals with suitable traits and vice versa. The life adapts itself by changing. In 1859, 20 years after his travel on board of the Beagle, Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. Rapidly, his theory finds opponents. The main accusation is that it questions the existing pattern of the Bible and Genesis since 2000 years. The first publication of On the Origin of Species is sold in only one day. Then, other publications are reprinted. Finally, 6 reprints are corrected and completed by Darwin, who responds to attacks and criticisms by means of his book. Intelligently, he adapts and finalizes his creation. Meanwhile, he stays far from fruitless debates. The power of his book is based on its reasonable size that is open to as many as possible and not only to experts. In the end, in 1869, despite the strong oppositions against Darwin's theory, it has been approved by the majority of the scientific world. But be careful not to confuse the Darwin's evolutionism with the Lamarck's transformism.
The main difference between transformism of Lamarck and evolutionism of Darwin is visible on these pictures. Here we see giraffes on a particular environment composed by a big tree with high foliage. Unfortunately, these foliage are only available food of areas. Problem: giraffes are too small. On the one hand, Lamarck thinks giraffes can adapt to this situation. He thinks they can extend progressively size of neck to try to reach foliage, and then transmit these acquired characteristics to their progeny. Over the generation, we will have a new perfectly giraffes optimized to reach this high foliage. Lamarck thinks organs can be transformed by natural pressure. In contrary, Darwin thinks that there are different types of giraffes inherent, with different morphological characteristics acquired by mutation. In this situation, giraffe with long neck will have capacity to eat foliage, so more likely to survive and to transmit these good abilities to their progeny. In nature, we can observe this mechanism. Theory of evolution is an elaborated process from Darwin's observations, and this objective is to describe dynamics of population. An English mathematician Hardy and a German doctor Weinberg determined by a mathematical principle that one population can remain stable, so don't change, if many conditions are satisfied. Specifically, frequencies of different genotypes in population, that is, hereditary heritage, or genetics and formation of individual, stay in equilibrium if no mutation occurs, no immigration takes place, fertilization is random, the population is large, and no selection is made. In that case, no evolution. These 5 assumptions of Hardy-Weinberg principle therefore also constitute the 5 factors we can cause evolutionary changes in population. They are random mutation, gene flow, so individual immigrations or gametes transporting new population, no random mating, genetic drift in little population, and pressure by natural selection. Now I will focus on most important factors. Mutation are the final causes of evolution. It corresponds to the fact that the complex mechanisms governing the duplications of gametes can introduce errors that slightly alter information which are encoded in these cells. Genetic drift in little population represent a random phenomenon, as a rare event or a particular individual movement which improve a loss of diversity in population. For an example, I could mention bottleneck effect. In this draw, parental population is composed by green and yellow individuals and just a little red individuals. By a hazard event, hurricane or epidemic, bottleneck happens. The remaining individuals who contribute to the next generation are mostly green. Red individuals disappeared and yellow are in minority. We observe a loss of diversity. Bottleneck can be a very negative thing for resilience of population because even if her size can increase again after a natural disaster, this population will be in lack of variability and so very vulnerable for future disasters. Now, natural selection. This factor, resulting by Darwin's observations, in the Henry process, we allows adaptive changes with a gain of diversity. First, it requires variations between the individuals who make up population. Secondly, these variations should lead to differences in the number of descent to the next generation. That means there must be selective environment pressure applied of population, like pressure of the climate, food, predator, or disease for an example. To finish, a variation must be able to be genetically inherited. In this condition, we observe a preservation of positive variations in the struggle for life and a rejection of harmful variations.
As Alexander says, in a global case, the natural selection occurs when an individual gets a mutation which allows him to evolve in better conditions and get an easier life in his environment. With the time, the number of individuals with the mutation increases, because those who hadn't it had a less longer life. In this way, the individuals with the mutation become the new species. Here is an example. The birch's moth is a butterfly who lives in the north of Europe. This species have two popular forms, one which is white with little parts of black named Typica, and one which is black named Carbonaria, who has been observed for the first time next to Manchester in 1849. At the end of the century, the population of Carbonaria forms could reach 98% of the population, but only within birch's forest, next to the industrial zones in Great Britain. But what this changement occurred? In fact, in this period, the Industrial Revolution was launched, producing a huge pollution by the burning coal that has changed the color of birch's trunks, passing from white to black. The issue is that these butterflies go sleep during the daytime on their trunks. In this way, the wild butterfly on black trunks were extremely recognizable for their predators. The scientists make a map where we see the distribution of butterflies in different areas with the industrial zones. In this map, we can make a link between the industrial zones and the highly population of black butterflies.
To resume, 3 words are very important to remember to allow evolution. Variability, acquired by a random mutation which allow creation of little characteristics. Heritability, to transmit variabilities. And selection, to favor some individuals at the expense of others.
The social Darwinism is an ideology which appears in 1880 by Émile Gautier. It consists to see the evolution of humanity according to the survival of the fittest by a socially and politically ways, leading to the progress and the improvement of the human species. So, it considers that the richest one will survive while the poorest one have more difficulties during their life. Only the power and the money advantage you and not your characteristics. A form of social Darwinism is the eugenics. There are two sources of eugenics, the positive one and the negative one. The negative eugenics consists to reduce the number of a population until its disappearance to keep the best genetics. And the positive eugenics is the idea to make children with two peoples considered to have a highly genetic potential. For example, the Nazi states make the two ones. They kill person with a mental handicap, gay person, or black people
and the law indicates that persons which were considered Aryans had the restriction to have children with people who are not stated Aryans. Another example of negative eugenics is the sterilization of all persons with an handicap and all persons who have a low intellectual coefficient. These people couldn't have children, and the idea was to reduce the number of the population very quickly. This happens in United States and Sweden during the 70s. But the choice of the characteristic of your future children, is it a form of an actual eugenics?